Okay, welcome everyone to our Planning Commission meeting for March 24th. We'll start out with the chair determination letter in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-207, subsection 4 of the Utah Open and Public Meeting Act. I have determined that conducting an electronic meeting of the Centerville Planning Commission with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination is based on the facts and circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. And with that, let's move right along into the Pledge of Allegiance. Mackenzie. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. A lot of work for you right there at the front, Mackenzie. Thank you for taking care of all of that for us. Okay, it is my turn to give a thought or a prayer. I'll do a brief thought, and it's too bad that Shaylin's not here. You know, for most of my tenure on the Planning Commission, I've kind of done these little, I guess you could say, history lessons about Centerville. And this time I decided, you know, to me at least, it feels like hopefully we're winding down on this pandemic. You know, I think if we just kind of keep doing what we're doing, things will be heading in the right direction. So I thought it might be interesting to just take a second and look back and see what the pandemic may have looked like in Centerville 100 years ago or 103 years ago with the Spanish flu, as some people called it, or just the influenza or just the flu. One of the things that's interesting really quickly is that Utah was fairly well spared from the impact of the 1918 influenza pandemic. Didn't really come to Utah until about October of 1918, whereas it had been in other parts of the country pretty heavily by that point. And it's interesting because there were some very similar debates at the time about closing schools, closing businesses, what types of meetings would you allow, you know, mask usage or not mask usage. And there was, you know, reading through some of the stuff from back then, it felt very similar. In Utah in general, well, Salt Lake City, I guess you could say, that's where I could find the best data about cases and whatnot, was from Salt Lake City. There were 10,268 cases reported in Salt Lake City. 576 of them died, which leads to a case fatality rate of 5.6%, which is 10 times higher than what we're experiencing in the state with COVID. I could not find any specific information about Centerville, which is interesting, but I did find a little bit of information about Bountiful. In 1918, there were 68 deaths in Bountiful, and 10 of those were attributed to the flu. So Bountiful, I don't know how many cases total there were for Bountiful, but just about 10 or so people died. So that's the closest I could find for Centerville. As I was reading through the Davis County Clipper, and you know, each week back then they would do what they called Centerville chats and just kind of talk about what was going on in Centerville. I couldn't ever find any listing for anybody dying in Centerville. That doesn't mean that nobody did, but there were a handful of people that were listed as being sick and suffering or whatnot, but they all seemed to recover, that I could tell as far as reading through those. So it was interesting, just kind of learn about it and see. Like I said, it seems like Centerville, especially Utah in general, were not as hard hit as the rest of the country was, but definitely came here, and it's kind of interesting that way. So with that, I'm going to offer a really brief prayer, and then we'll get on with our meeting. God, dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for the opportunity we have to meet together as a planning commission to discuss the needs of the city and the ways that we can help make the city the best that it can be, and do so in a way that is pleasing to the residents. We thank thee for the freedom that we have to be able to assemble together, and for the technology that allows us to do so in this remote fashion. We ask thee to bless that we can continue as usual with courteous discussions, and that we may be able to discuss the issues of the city and do so in a respectful and open manner. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Thank you. Let's move right along now. In the agenda, the first item we have is an administrative decision. It's for a conditional use permit for VetIQ. It has been noticed as a public hearing, and we will turn the time over to Mackenzie to give us a rundown.
Thank you, Chair Daly and members of the commission. So I'm going to do just a short recap of the staff report. So this is a public hearing for a conditional use, and VetIQ is listed as a Veterinary Services use, and the applicant proposes to put a small veterinary office inside Walmart in one of their accessory uses near the front of the store. So going through the code for conditional uses or for accessory uses for both of those things, Walmart was set up and approved to house such accessory uses, and veterinary services are conditional in commercial very high zones, which Walmart is in a commercial very high zone. The only things to note, or that staff wanted to point out, is Walmart is under a special development agreement, so there might be a few things in the administration of getting the permit all completed that might affect this application. But otherwise, the applicant has provided information that no animals will be entering Walmart itself, that there isn't a separate exterior entrance, and that all the utilities, the infrastructure has already been put in place to have such an accessory use. So it is up to Planning Commission to decide if they meet those other criteria about impacting the neighborhood. But the applicant is here, and it is Ryan Sexton, so it might be good to give him a moment.
Before we do that, does anybody have any questions for Mackenzie? I see some shaking of heads and things. Pretty straightforward on the staff report, Mackenzie.
Just real quick, Kevin, a question on the conditions of approval. Mackenzie, you note that it will run with the land. Do we typically allow a conditional use permit to run with the land when it's a specific tenant occupant that may leave, or after 5 or 10 years? How do we address that typically?
Yes, most of the conditional uses do run with the land, so that either the owner of the property only has to go through if they are having tenants that have those specific uses, usually a developer can come in and request a conditional use so that they can have various tenants. And so they do usually run with the land. We can always modify that if you would like, but it has been standard practice.
I don't think I care. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that brings up a good point, though. So one of the things you mentioned, Mackenzie, is that there is going to be an outside access to the building for this. And I think that, in my opinion, I think that's an important part of it, rather than, having animals go in and out through Walmart and wherever else. And so maybe that would be an appropriate condition for approval for this, is that it does maintain a separate outside access.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's your prerogative to add that. I think that would be wise.
And I'll jump on. Yeah. Did you say me?
Yes, Mason, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. Just a general statement. I'm in favor of approving this. I do want to understand, however, I'm assuming that veterinary services include euthanasia. Is that correct?
So I'll step in here. Actually, this is Ryan, the applicant. No, we do not do euthanasia at our clinics. We send those to a full service veterinary hospital. We don't do surgeries or overnight stays or boarding either. We basically do what we run of the mill quick serve veterinary clinics, well checks, get your dog a chip, simple vaccinations, things like that. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background. But yeah, that's all we do. We don't do, so we're not going to take a dog and do surgery in there. We're not going to do euthanasia, that kind of stuff. We'll send that to a full service veterinary hospital, and we work within the community. Our veterinary team they'll have a recommendation set up to go with. So if you need someone, we'll have a recommendation for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so Mackenzie, when we approve, quote, veterinary uses for this, and it runs with the land, other tenants could come in. And I'm actually not opposed to, if our code allows for veterinary uses to include euthanasia or surgeries. I'm just looking for clarification from the ordinance itself. Do we have any clarification from our?
So our code is very brief when it mentions veterinary services. Just it says an establishment providing medical care and treatment for animals, which may include accessory grooming and boarding. So if there's more specifics, it might be at the county level, but not specifically in our ordinance.
Just for some clarification, I think you're arguing some good points on the conditions of the conditional use permit. So I think it should be at least tied to the applicant's expectation that this is a limited service veterinary and at least condition the veterinary service to reflect that limited service. The other thing to know is that, yes, it does run with the land, but if they abandon the use, it expires. And so if somebody does not keep that use going, it will be considered deemed abandoned, and then the use would automatically go away.
Yeah. And that is, will be my understanding for the vote today, is that if I were to vote in favor of this, it would be in favor of that limited use, so that if it did run with the land, it would not include an option for euthanasia, which frankly, I'm not exactly opposed against. Having it in a food stuff area is a concern, but since that's not a concern, I just want the record to reflect that if we were to approve it, it appears, and this is just clarifying, probably even belaboring, that our conditional use approval would not include anything beyond what has been stated by the applicant.
Okay. Those are some good thoughts there. I appreciate that discussion. I think that let's keep this in mind for later when we get closer to a motion, and we'll talk about that then. Becky, you've been off mute. Did you have something you wanted to add or not?
I was actually going to ask a question that Corey clarified, so I don't need to.
Okay, sounds good. All right, any other questions for staff before we turn the time over to the applicant? Nope, great. So we'll invite the applicant to formally address the planning commission now. Mr. Sexton, if you'd like to discuss anything else from the staff report and anything else you'd like us to know, then now is your time to do that.
I think it's actually pretty well covered, but just a kind of a little background on us. This is, I believe, about our 170th location between a Walmart and a Meijer store. We have 3,300 locations nationwide. We do them between community clinics. We do them in Tractor Supplies, Pet Food Express, several other companies under co-branding things. So that's a pretty standard thing we put together. We do well. Obviously, we don't have any pets coming in the store. We've done very well in avoiding that. We reuse the existing opening outside typically and just replace the existing exit door that the Walmart tenant spaces have with a storefront glass door, some simple signage, and good to go. I think it's good for the community, and it's good for good for Walmart, and we still support local vets when we're done at the end of the day.
I can't remember if you said, Ryan, do you do any grooming?
No, closest we come to grooming is we'll trim your dog's nails.
Great, thanks.
So I'm assuming, Ryan, that you don't have any problem with the limitations that we've discussed as part of the approval. Do you have any concerns with that?
No, not at all. Our lease is limited by that some of those same items anyways. We can't have dogs coming through the stores. We can't have any of that. So it's fine.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, Mr. Sexton. At this time, this matter has been scheduled for a public hearing, and we will invite any members of the public who would like to speak on this. I don't see anybody as a participant, but I don't know. Do we have this one, Mackenzie, notice to be able to call in?
No, I mean, yes, but it's silent
Nobody's
and there's
called
no
in.
other participants.
Okay. Just want to make sure that we do give people, a chance to discuss it if they would like. So maybe we just give it another few seconds in case somebody is watching on YouTube and decides they want to give us a call, all right?
I think I'm the only one on YouTube at the moment, so just a couple
Okay.
seconds more and
Well,
we're good to go.
That's so sad. Thank you. All right, then with that, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. And we'll turn the time back to the Planning Commission. Any more questions for staff or the applicant before we discuss some potential amendments to the motion? Mason.
Yeah, just had a quick question, and I meant to raise this earlier. One of the proposals in the staff recommendation is that the signage for the services shall follow city sign ordinance. Is that not already default? Isn't it redundant to impose that as a condition?
It probably is redundant, but yes.
I mean, it's good. Perhaps it's good to have it institutionally to make sure that people are following the right procedures. I'm just digging to make sure that I'm understanding. Is there something unique that I need to understand other than that's just what they should do anyways?
Just one for further is because it's under the development agreement, there is a sign restriction package approved as part of Walmart. And so the applicant will just need to get a hold of that for either from us or from their lessor, and we can go over the parameters. But it sounds like the signing is fairly minimal, so it's likely, hopefully, a moot issue.
Yeah,
Corey, we took a quick pass through the sign code issue. We have a very limited sign program. It looks like it'll fit well within the existing parameters.
I was wondering, Mason, if that was listed as just to remind of the parish lane design guidelines that affect signage. But I mean, I don't know.
Mason or Mackenzie, I guess the question then would be on the motions to approve. Do we say follow Sydney ordinance as well as the development agreement so that there's not a misunderstanding there?
That's a good clarification because there is both that it needs to follow.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Spencer, I missed that. Could you restate what you just said?
So in motion number 2, we would just add veterinary services use shall follow city sign ordinance as well as applicable development agreement requirements. That's my best stab at it. I could let Mason wordsmith that better, I bet.
I don't know about that. This is my clarification question then. If we do say and also the development agreement requirements, is that the exact same requirements that are invoked by condition 3?
Yes.
Probably for Corey and Mackenzie. Yeah, it is. Okay, so maybe we just say the signage for the veterinary services shall follow city sign ordinance and shall be subject to compliance with applicable terms and conditions, and dump them all into one same condition, perhaps?
So you're thinking maybe get rid of 3 or not?
Yeah,
no.
It would be subsumed into 2. So you'd interlineate it so that anything after ordinance period at the end of 2, and then you strike out everything up to is subject, and then you just say services in 2, the signage for the veterinary services use shall follow city sign ordinance city sign ordinances, perhaps, and shall be subject to compliance with applicable terms and conditions, and then continue out as in number 3.
Okay.
And that way it's subject to both, and therefore the most restrictive terms would control.
And
I
then
just
do
wanna
we
make
add a third
sure-
option that says it's a limited use veterinary clinic?
Yeah, we could, as discussed, if we want to make sure that we put in the record that our vote does not approve euthanasia or medical procedures.
So
On
hold on,
that,
Lisa,
on that
go ahead, Lisa.
suggestion to combine the conditions, I'd prefer to keep them separate because I don't want to have to argue with somebody that it's only the signage that has to comply with the ordinances and the development agreement. So maybe under 2, you could just say that what does it say? The signage for the veterinary services shall follow city ordinances and all conditions of approval for the Walmart development, including the development agreement referred to in condition 3.
Yeah, I didn't think that. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and then if you want to add some conditions on, you could say no surgery or euthanasia and no overnight boarding. Those seem to be, you could add the grooming, but I think the boarding and the surgery are probably what you would want to limit.
Okay.
Oh, and then the other suggested condition was that animal access shall be through the outside access only and not through the Walmart store. Or not through the main store, however we want to refer to that on the access.
Lisa,
Okay.
I just have one clarification on that. I fundamentally agree with you. Here's where I'm concerned from a perspective of city complaints. Walmart, I mean, we know the restrictions on Walmart and grocery and animals, but the reality of it is I've been frequently to Walmart where people do take their animals in, and Walmart is not as disciplined sometimes as store managers to limit that. I want to be careful that we don't get the veterinary clinic roped into that complaint. Is there a way to?
Well, yeah, originally I said no animals shall enter Walmart, and then I revised it and said, so maybe we just say no, so I put it the other way, that animals shall access the veterinarian clinic through the outside door, because I agree, service animals can access Walmart, and yeah, other people take it in. But anyway, just maybe if we say animal access for the veterinary services shall enter through the outside. Does that handle it?
Yeah, I mean, we just, we just have that issue where we just help the veterinary clinic be able to be separated out in some manner if a complaint comes in, so that we reduce any burden on them for others who do things of their own accord.
Yeah, and these are only if the planning commission wants to address them. So if Corey's argument is persuasive to want to avoid enforcement against vet IQ just because people take their dogs into Walmart, you could leave that out. But
I get the feeling I would like to address this from a planning commission perspective, so I'm in favor of doing that. Lisa, could you go back to number 2 again? Sorry. The signage for the veterinary services use shall follow city sign ordinance and shall be subject to any agreements.
any conditions of
Well,
approval for the Walmart project, including
Okay.
the development agreement referred to in condition 3.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody else have anything they would like to discuss or mention? No? Then, sorry, I'm just finishing writing up here. It feels like a lot of work when we make significant changes. Okay, so let me make sure that I've got this right. I'll make a motion here, and we can discuss the merits of individual motion if we'd like to, but as it is, item number 1, we're gonna leave that one alone. Number 2, we've got an addition to that one. Number 3, we'll leave that one alone. We're going to add number 4 about outside access, and then, the limited services such as euthanasia. That'd be a number 5. How do we want to go ahead?
I think it was
Becky?
euthanasia, overnight stays, and
Medical procedures.
medical procedures.
So this
And-
use shall not, the approval under this use shall not include euthanasia, medical services, medical procedures, sorry, and overnight boarding.
Okay. All
Lee,
right.
is it worth putting something like a catch-all that says "and other uses of such nature," or should we just keep it limited?
Lisa hates those kinds of catch-alls. I would, at least I try to do them, and she's always like, I don't know, Becky.
Well, I'm just trying to find the definition, because I would actually like to stick to the language that our definition uses and then exclude those terms, because I don't know if it's medical procedures. I thought we were talking about surgery.
Yeah, I wonder if surgical procedures is the
Medical-
better terminology.
Arguing, I know they're going to be giving shots and such. Oh, okay.
Here you go, Lisa.
Okay, an establishment
Mackenzie's
providing
got it.
medical care and treatment for animals, which includes accessory grooming or boarding services. Oh, okay. I still think I prefer maybe surgery over medical procedures, because I think they will be giving vaccination shots and such.
I agree as well.
Okay, so the approval under this conditional use permit, sorry, the approval under
Can
this
I-
conditional use permit. Yeah, go ahead.
Can we return to the applicant? And I know this is probably unorthodox about medical procedures. Are they in this clinic? Is it worth asking whether they're going to be doing things like removing dew claws from puppies or spay and neuter?
There'll be no spay and neuter. We may remove some dew claws, but typically that it's not a very common occurrence for us. I would say we don't focus on that. Typically when people come and do that, they're going to a full service veterinary hospital because they're going to do tail docking, and there's usually a long.
And then, are you addressing any emergency surgical things such as removing a stuck bone?
No.
Or
no, we get so, and it kind of, I'll kind of, I've been listening in the whole time. One thing you can go back into is we do a queuing system, especially now with COVID. You actually pull up and make a phone call. Our number's on there, or you can join our website. We'll queue you, come out to your car, grab your dog, bring it in, and then queue you to come out as well. So and there's no entrance from the store. We have an employee only entrance to use the restroom, but there's actually no physical way for a customer customer will ever be allowed to come in through the store to drop their dog off.
Mason, you were still on mute.
that makes it difficult to speak. Wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry for pivoting back to that.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
So-
Any other questions? I'm easy peasy.
Well, so Mason, does that change anyway? If we were to say surgical procedures, does that change how you feel about that?
No.
Okay. So then the approval under this conditional use permit shall not include euthanasia, surgical procedures, or overnight boarding. Does that cover what you had in mind? Okay. All right, I'll make a motion. We'll take a stab at this and then we can fix it up if we need to. So I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve the conditional use permit for Vet IQ for the Veterinary Services at 200 North, 400 West with the following conditions. Condition number 1 as outlined in the staff report. Number 2, the signage for the veterinary services shall follow city sign ordinances as well, and shall be subject to any condition of approval of the Walmart project, including the agreement mentioned in item number 3. Include item number 3 as set in the staff report. We'll add number 4, animals shall access the veterinary clinic through outside doors. And item number 5, the approval under this conditional use permit shall not include euthanasia, surgical procedures, or overnight boarding.
Kevin, I would amend item number 4 where they would be outside doors exclusive for exclusive access to the veterinary clinic. So as not to confuse outside doors from who knows where else.
Animals shall access the veterinary clinic exclusively through outside doors.
Outside doors exclusive to the veterinary clinic.
Okay. Outside doors exclusive to the veterinary clinic. Okay, I can go for that. We'll change 4 to, so 4, animals shall access the veterinary clinic through outside doors exclusive to the veterinary clinic. Do we have a second?
I'm concerned before we move to the second about that language. The word exclusive seems perhaps ambiguous. I know what is intended to be said, but I'm trying to think of a rephrasing there that is something like solely dedicated to, or.
I like that. That's what I mean when I say exclusive. So I like that, Mason.
But our wordsmith,
Outside doors.
I wonder, Chair Daly, if it's worth asking Ms. Romney again.
Sure. Lisa, do you have any input on this one, since you'd be the one to have to field any questions about it?
Yeah, I think that is an interesting point. I mean, we don't want to ratchet it down so tightly, but I think I'm fine with the solely dedicated to. I think we can work with that.
Okay.
Good points.
So animals shall access the veterinary clinic through outside doors solely dedicated to the veterinary clinic. Great. We'll go with that for number 4. Now do we have a second?
I'll second it for you.
Okay, Spencer seconded. Becky,
Sorry,
what did you
Becky.
have to say?
I cut off Becky. I'm so sorry, Becky.
Okay. We didn't want to put anything about grooming in there because they may just clip nails and stuff. We don't want to be too exclusive there, just so that we understand that.
Right.
Okay. And I will second that.
Let's go with Becky with the second then after the question. Okay, we have a motion on the table. Any further discussion about our motion? Is it clear as mud for everybody? Perfect. Seeing no further discussion, let's go ahead and vote on the motion. We'll start with Commissioner Wright.
Aye.
Commissioner Shagrud?
Aye.
Commissioner Kerr?
Aye.
Commissioner Summerhays?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. That was fun. And thank you to the applicant for your input on that one. Okay, let's move along to the next item on our agenda. We've got parking standards review. We're going to continue our discussion, and tonight we're going to talk about industrial uses. So we'll turn the time over to Corey.
Thank you, Chair Daly, members of the commission. I know you're excited for training, so we'll try to keep this short. You have a very short list of our industrial uses. 2 interesting points I found in reviewing the ordinance is the first one, where we have uses listed with parking standards, but those uses actually are not allowed in the city. I'm okay with that fundamentally. I think the excuse, for lack of better terms, is that you had an overhaul of the ordinance back in 2003 and probably comparing the use list that's allowed and the parking list it seems to me, went a little bit unchecked. But I think we should still call out uses if and when we ever change our minds, they are made available. The second item that I think is important is the warehouse issue. This is probably my most frustrating parking standard. I know of several buildings out here on the west side that when they come in and develop, they will exclusively use the low parking count of the warehouse. And what happens is they build a great big building with minimal parking based on the warehouse, and maybe a small little office they put in their application. And then the next thing we know, they want to open up dance studios, gymnasiums, child play centers. And now we have a battle, not only for insufficient parking on one site. We have a couple of buildings in the South Business Park where there's 2 of them on one lot and they share the parking, and one dominates the other. And therefore the other user that needed a chance to expand was unable to expand and had to search for another building. And they actually operate out of 2 different buildings now in that site instead of one. I'm not sure that I have a solution. I think that's something we just need to take a look at, but I think that's the largest problem. I know I have a 17,000 square foot warehouse here with 11 parking stalls, and they keep wanting to lease out more space for these other users that find that the rents for industrial or someplace they can start a business. And I know Commissioner Wright has been able to use the services of a dance studio, and the layout of the parking is not really fun at the hour exchange levels because it was never intended to be used for that. So I don't expect a solution. I'm just hoping that you'll add that warehouse use to the list. I will just then finalize that list for you in one more meeting to show the breadth of those uses, if you're okay with that. And then we will go back and research and accomplish some of the ideals we talked about at our last meeting, and then bring it back to you.
Great. So Corey, really quickly on that one with the wholesale and warehousing, not a lot of help from some of the surrounding cities on what they're doing. West Bountiful doesn't address it. North Salt Lake's got the exact same thing as what we've got going on pretty much, right? Maybe Farmington, same manufacturing, so 2 spaces per 1,000. That's twice as much as we're doing.
Right.
So anyway, I guess I would like you to go back and take a look at it and say good luck to you. I'm coming up with the best possible solution.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I'm not quite sure yet how to manage that. I'll probably talk to some of the other planners, see if they're running into the same quote flex space problems in the city. And then I'll talk with our city engineer in their traffic tables. I mean, I'm really uncomfortable sometimes when you base it just solely on employees, because somebody will say, well, it's only one employee, me. But then we have the out that says whichever is greater in certain circumstances. So I don't know if I'll have a perfect solution. That's just the problem I see.
Could you base it off of, with these flex spaces in industrial, could you base it off of use?
Well, that's what they do, is they come in and say, I'm doing 250 square feet of office, the rest will be storage.
But I mean, like a specific, not just the like use of the building, but like the actual like dance studio or, you know, gym or whatever kind of use.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm hearing you is that you kind of identify all their potential uses. But if they start seeing that their parking ratchets it up to those uses, they will often say, oh, no, I promise I won't do that. So an example is across the street from our offices out here at Public Works, the 17,000 square foot building. We brought that up and they said, no, I'll just do warehouse. And they've tried to convert that to a gymnasium 3 times now. And the future tenant has come to get a business license. We have to show them that, hey, we track these counts of these parking and there's none left for you. And then I get the landowner mad at me as well as the tenant who spent a lot of time negotiating a contract, and then the city's the bad person that says, no, you can't do this. Way up at the Parish Creek, if you remember, we had the problem with the banking. They're like, oh, I've got 5 units here. I'll use it up to 4 and then I'll worry about the 5th tenant space at a later date. And then they ran out. They only had 3 stalls left. So it's a perpetual problem. I don't know if I can solve it, but But I think your idea is use is that we just assume maybe a more aggressive use in the first, in the flex space. They have to prove otherwise or something that,
And then they have to come to us for a parking, you know, if the use changes drastically enough, I would just say they would have to come to us, not just for a new build, but like in order to get the ability to use it as
Yeah.
something from what they originally told us.
yeah, something that makes it so that they think in advance of how much hoop they want to jump through in the future by maybe shortening the use list up front. We'll see what I dream up, and then you can pick it apart.
Corey, is it then mostly an enforcement issue for you? Because it seems like if we're more restrictive up front and say, hey, this is warehouse space and our parking is based off of that actual use, and then they'll say, well, we want to really use it as a dance studio, then we say, fine, that's okay. That will be a conditional use or some other measure that we put in place so that we can have the ability to require the additional parking stalls for that. I guess, again, so I guess I've got two questions or thoughts. The first is, shouldn't we just enforce what we already have in place? And number two, if we're not going to really, if it's too difficult to manage the enforcement process, do we just have those other uses be a conditional use within the warehouse use? Does that make sense? Am I elaborating that correctly? I don't know.
I think I'm understanding it. You know, the first question is, yes, it's an enforcement issue. Where we catch it is that, let's say they build 10,000 square feet of warehouse, that's all it is. And they come in and start wanting to split it up into tenant spaces. We do the banking program like we did with the Parish Creek. And what the burden is that staff gets these business licenses in, and you just have to note in your mind, which project is it? How much parking did they have? And you can tell that it's a frustrating day late, dollar short when that next business comes in and you're out of space. Because initially I'll just do the banking, you know, okay, you can do this until you run out of space. And I have them sign a document, it's put in the business license file. But if I left, the next person that knows to research that business license file and question what the banking program is. So yeah, it's a terrible enforcement. I think the second part that I'm hearing is something to the effect, and I'm just restating your comment, something to the effect that when we approve it, these are the listed uses. Any changes in uses have to go back to the commission. Something generic like that. I mean, I'm not saying to do that. That's what I'm saying is they understand full well that if they come in and tell you, this is what I'm doing, and it minimizes the parking, they know that it's not just to come back into the banking system. They have to come back and amend their site plan to account for these additional uses.
And that's kind of what I'm suggesting. So, yeah.
I have two thoughts also. I know that part of the reason why I think there's two competing thoughts in my brain. One is that, you know, historically we've had a lot of parking modifications because maybe we have a slightly more aggressive parking requirement than other cities. So that's just one thing to think about. So maybe they're out of spots because we're a little bit more aggressive. I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing, but in some instances, I think it can be burdensome, pretty overburdensome to developers and, you know, landlord owners. The second thing though, with that is, I wonder if, and it's sort of similar to what Spence was saying, like maybe we could find something where almost that when they come in to this, we assume that it's going to be a higher, you know, parking requirement needed. And then unless they show us right then and ask for something different, then we don't have to, you know, we put that in place that's sort of like the highest that we would need for what would happen in this space. And then we can, you know, edge it off as they prove with their site plan that they're not going to use that.
Yeah, I mean, that's just I think you're arguing the reverse orders rather than wait for them to come and problem. You're just the city's going to assume
Yep.
that there'll be some conversion of flex space and greater amounts, and we just have a higher standard unless you show otherwise.
Yep. That's, I mean, also putting into consideration that I think we are our requirements might be slightly higher than
Right.
other cities.
Yeah, I think that the tough one there, though, is to make sure that we're not punishing those people who actually really do want to use it for warehouse space and, overdoing it for them. But at the same time, maybe that's a thing that we need to think about from a planning commission perspective. And I kind of alluded to this last time, which is maybe we've been a little bit too loose with our permitted uses in the industrial zone with, the church is a good example for me that,
Yeah.
But I don't think it's punishing them if in the process they are able to prove that they're not going to be using it for that. Then I'm just saying in the process of approval, they would show us that they're using it for whatever, and then it's not as burdensome.
And I think providing a burden of proof to somebody during the application process is difficult because they may be building something on spec. So if I'm a developer and I'm agreeing with, I see what you're saying, Becky, but I agree with Kevin. And the reason I stated what I did is if a developer comes in and says, and represents in a planning commission in a public meeting that this is only warehouse space and it's only for distribution, then we take them at their word. And then if they want to change use, fine. That's fine if you want to change the use, but now you're going to be subject to a greater parking count if you want to change that use. So that's why I like to almost within that manufacturing or warehouse industrial space, yeah, there's some permitted uses, but those permitted uses also have a different parking ratio count. So if you are thinking in the future that you may not use this for industrial warehouse space, then you probably ought to think about that ahead of time. Or otherwise, what you build is what you build, and you're going to have to stick with that. But
that's kind of, I think, the problem that we ran into, like Corey was saying, this banking program is we were sitting here trying to figure out if we could approve this. And then now what's going to happen with that last tenant is Corey, I don't know exactly what's happened, but you've said that they ran out of parking now for this last thing. So is that going to stay unused? And is that going to be, an unused spot that's a burden kind of to the city that we have, something that could be otherwise beneficial, So I just don't love the banking program because I think it giving them that option and them saying like, oh yeah, no. And then like, oh, I guess we'll just go with market standards and what this is wanting to do this and want to do this. It doesn't really it's a lack of planning on their part that then we have to be bear the brunt of, I guess.
Your point's well taken. The lucky part of the Parish Creek is they have one more building to build, and that's how they plan on making up some additional parking. But what if that wasn't the case? Like we have the old Waterscape building out on the South Industrial Park, sharing an office with Jerry Cook. I'm not sure who is doing his operation now, but also with the golf simulator company. And those two competed against each other because True Golf wanted to be able to add a second floor with a mezzanine because the building was big enough, but ran out of parking because the other facility used it primarily all up. So they.
I said this a few months ago, but if a developer chooses to leave a space vacant so that they can utilize parking for another tenant, that's on them. And to me, I don't think we should be in the business of caring specifically what tenants go in there so much as we're considering the uses and the site plan and the land use. And, if like I said, if a developer wants to limit themselves, so be it. I think that's a private matter that doesn't concern us. I could be totally off base in saying that, but if they want to do that, that's their prerogative, I think.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Spencer. I think you're right. And I think that generally speaking, a developer is not going to go, I'm going to make this to leave it vacant. I am just saying that there is if it consistently happens, then we as a city are left with several places throughout the city that perhaps are underutilized and could be used for something else, could potentially create, bad situations for vandals or, unsavory. I'm not trying to do worst case scenario, but if you have a bunch of unused space in the city, what's the point of that? It just seems like, so it's not necessarily our job, I think, to manage that completely all of the time. But I do think that we need to recognize that what we're putting into place, the different, ways in which we're doing things could lean towards making that happen more or less, and how that affects the city.
And I'm thinking out loud, maybe one of the ways that you have to do that is tighten up your uses and the parking ratios associated with those uses up front during the permitting and approval process. Otherwise, if it's very broad, you're always going to run into this issue. But if it's more specific and more narrow in its scope, then you can eliminate some of those challenges.
Yeah, I think I think both sides are arguing great points, and I think there are solutions. It's just a matter of whether you're looking north or whether you're looking south when you do it. But I agree with all the points. Early in my mind, I think I've got some ideas, particularly with how we handle change of use in an approved building. And I think that'll be fundamental, that if they know up front that changing of use is not something that they can just go down the road and bank up to the future. The change of use has a more stringent review process. I think that's probably where we would do that, because I agree, if a developer wants to use it all up for one use, what do we care, other than when it comes into the enforcement situation, where if they know up front during their approval, this is what you're doing, and any change of use goes back not to staff to sit and argue about a banking program. You've got to do a site plan amendment to get that additional use. So something like that is what I'm thinking. We'll bring back some ideas. We can debate it.
I think that's what I'm looking forward to, is seeing what you have there. Obviously, something that allows for warehousing in that traditional sense, but maybe also kind of anticipates the likelihood that it's not going to just be a traditional warehouse, but probably something else like a dance studio or a gym or a church or who knows what, because that seems to happen quite a bit to us in the city. So,
and I've got a few thoughts in my mind, whether it's a change of use just simply from warehouse. It could be a change of use where we change the category and you're trying to put the commercial uses in, which are the higher standards, so that if you cross the threshold outside of an industrial count and you're trying to use the commercial counts that are allowed in the industrial, that's a trigger point. Because I think it's the commercial uses that generate most of the problems.
I like that, Corey. And I was just going to say, this kind of brings up another point that I recognize kind of as pattern throughout the years of being on planning commission, is just sometimes, and I don't know that this is intentional always with every developer, but sometimes it feels like, we approve something, we approve a rezone or something, and based on, a site plan or something, and then a site plan changes almost, or a use or something changes so drastically that then, what we originally saw based on, let's move down this path. And then all of a sudden it's this totally different thing. And it's like, well, okay, how do we, and I know we have the ability to say, no, like this is too dissimilar, but we're trying to work with the developer. We're trying to be, helpful and, somebody that a city that you can work with. I just wonder if this speaks to it as well. In my mind, is that I felt like some developers come in and they say something, I don't know if they have an intention of actually even fulfilling that initial site plan or that initial what they're telling us, because sometimes what we're approving at the very end is very, very different than this initial one, I guess.
Yep, that's happened a couple of times.
all right, good discussion, everybody. Thank you for that. And I think, Corey, you've got some ideas. We look forward to seeing what you come back with on that one. So any questions for Corey? Corey, any questions for us?
No, just thank you for putting up with a little bit each meeting.
This is good. I think is a good way to do it. So thanks, Corey. All right, let's move along to the next item on our agenda, land use training part 3, and the illustrious Lisa Romney. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Let me see if I can get my presentation up for you. And okay, is everybody seeing that? Oh, good. I can still see you. That's great. When we use Teams, I can't see anybody with my PowerPoint presentations, but anyway, yes, this is our 3rd training on the Land Use Management Act, and we're on part 3, general land use provisions. And again, I appreciate having the opportunity to kind of discuss some of these points with the Planning Commission, and it continues to be a good exercise, at least for me. So I hope it is for you. But I had to go back in the annals of Romney travel, and I went back 17 years ago. We went to Galapagos Island. We only have 5 pages today, so I thought I'd use a trip that maybe the photos weren't quite as spectacular as some of the other ones. So, but anyway, it was a really fun trip, and yeah, back in 2004, it was fun. I don't know if you can see, but these are like bright red crabs. It's just crazy. Okay, so this chapter I really like because they start out with saying, as a matter of legislation, that every city will have a planning commission. So I like to look at this section as saying that, yes, Utah takes planning seriously, and it requires every city to have a planning commission. And so we're required to have an ordinance that spells everything out, and we have that in chapter 20 of our zoning code. And I double checked everything, and I think we kind of address all of the topics here. This is kind of one of the new ones that we have to have these rules of order and procedure and decorum. So we've added that. This item is interesting. It was added in 2017. And I'm kind of sorry to say, I think we're going to have to amend our ordinances. I don't know if you're getting paid for meetings that you do not attend, but the code does say that you're only eligible for per diem and travel expenses for meetings that you actually attend. So we'll be looking into that.
It's only for meetings that we attend.
It is? Okay, so they double check, and they only pay you if you attend. That's great. Good news. Okay. But I still need to amend the code because it doesn't actually say in the code meetings actually attended. So that's one amendment that I'll bring forward. And then the next section is just talking about the powers and duties of the Planning Commission. But again, by statute, the Planning Commission has to see and recommend to the City Council any general plan enactments or amendments. So anytime we're dealing with our general plan, anytime we're making amendments to our zoning code or our subdivision or any other land use regulations, that has to come to the Planning Commission first. And last time we talked about noticing, and all of these types of items do require by statute a public hearing on any of these legislative decisions. And so I've started, I'll try to keep up with the legislative changes this year. And so for this training, I've highlighted if that section has been amended by the 2021 legislative session. So you'll see this section 302 on your powers and duties has been amended. And that amendment is HB 409. And I think I mentioned that we wanted to stay ahead of the curve and do some Planning Commission training, and they did adopt a required 4 hours per year training for Planning Commission members. So we will meet that this year. You know, we're already on a good schedule here. And they also said that before a new planning commissioner can even participate in a meeting, they have to have at least 1 hour of training on the Land Use Management Act. So what we're going through, every planning commissioner will have to figure out some sort of training for them before they can even participate in their first meeting.
You could do a little pre-recorded video, Lisa, and have an hour long, like, you, and we can see your
Yeah.
face now.
I kind of like that. I think one year Corey did some videos back in the day. So yeah, that would be fun. Then I wouldn't have to do it over and over. So yeah, we'll have to do something. But we used to sit down with planning commissioners when they first started and give them the big binder and explain the general plan and the zoning code. So it's not a bad idea. From what I understand, I haven't poured through all the statute. You can also get credit if you attend at least 12. You can get up to 1 hour of credit if you attend 12 meetings in a year. So I think we're down to 3 hours because most of you attend lots of these meetings. So then let's see. Okay, this is probably the best part of the Galapagos is the giant tortoises. This is really what Galapagos is in Spanish, or a derivative of the word is tortoise. And these creatures are huge. They are up to like 900 pounds, and they can live in the wild for up to 100 years. And in captivity, the longest one lived for 170 years. And they're just they look prehistoric. They're just dinosaurs and crazy. And anyway, but they're amazing, and it just seems otherworldly. So that's the best part. You have to go to the Darwin Research Center to see these guys. And I think, yeah, Lonesome George was the last of one species of the Galapagos tortoises, and he died in 2012. So that species is extinct, but they have about 15 different species. 5 of them are extinct. So, okay. So the next, and again, any questions if you saw interesting things, but this one at the top, this is another 2017 amendment, I think, but basically developers were sort of getting frustrated at applications just stalling at the planning commission level. So they added this to the code that says that if the planning commission doesn't make a timely recommendation, the city council may consider that as a negative recommendation and just say, staff, bring this to us. We've never had to do that. We're pretty efficient, but it is in there to make sure that we make timely decisions and applications don't get stalled. Also, we have the authority to enter upon land, including private property when necessary, to either enforce our code or to do some research for some general plan amendments. But our code in our enforcement chapter 23, Corey will know, we actually say, yeah, we can enter private property at reasonable times under this statute, but we're going to let you know, and we want your approval. So usually when we do some enforcement, we'll try to stand on the sidewalk or in the complaining neighbor's yard so that we're not actually going on private property. But most of the time people will give us authority. But on that Chase Lane, that nuisance building, we couldn't get authority to go on the property, and we really needed to go in. So we went ahead and got an administrative warrant through the justice court, and our code refers to that process as well, and we've used it. So I'd rather do that than just go on private property unnoticed or notified. The next section states that this Land Use Management Act and the city zoning regulations don't necessarily apply to state property or federally owned property. And this section was also amended in this year's legislative session to eliminate all of this part about mountainous planning districts. Now, I read the entire section first and then did the update. So I was doing a little research trying to figure out what this mountainous planning district was. And then I went and found SB 240. And anyway, so it's been repealed. So we don't have to worry about that anymore. Just the basic, we don't regulate state-owned property and federal property. But then in section 305, it says, but all other cities and districts and everybody else does have to follow your zoning code. So only the state and United States are eliminated, but everybody else, generally counties, municipalities, if they own property in our city, they have to follow our zoning code.
And Lisa, as a side note, I guess that would affect us, for example, with the University of Utah, if they ever purchase, they don't own the building there on Main Street, but if they did, they kind of get to do their own thing. Having worked with the university, I know they like to try and their best to work with cities, but I also know that when cities have been belligerent or stubborn, they will do their own thing. So that's just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, that's interesting. So same thing with the post office, but I think, Corey, if I think they just leased the land.
Yeah, isn't that a lease?
Yeah, for the post office. So that's how
My
we.
understanding in Centerville is it's a leased land, but we had this problem in Ogden City in a previous life of mine, where the post office came in and said, we are not going to cooperate with your local land use ordinances. And we said, fine, you're exempted, but you don't get water, sewer and stuff from us. They rethought that real quick.
But this one's an interesting one because we've talked about the school district in the past, and the concern was that the school district could do whatever they want, but this section says no, they can't actually do whatever they want.
Well,
Right.
we'll get to that. They have the next 3 pages are basically schools. So
Okay.
That was when we were talking about like the electronic signs, right, Kevin?
That was part of it, yeah. Uh-huh.
all right. Well, on to the very, very cute Galapagos sea lions. These guys are happy. If I have to come back as anything, they're just so happy. Life's good. They just have to be careful for the sharks, but they're pretty good. Okay, let's see. Now, so we had back up here, it's talking about other entities, and it does include school districts here, but then we get on to all the next 2 pages are all about what we can and can't regulate in school districts. And so usually when I get to a statute like this that's really long, I try to get the gist of it and understand that if and when the school district comes, or a charter school, we're going to pull this statute out and really read the details, because it does say that we can, for charter schools, we can regulate setbacks, height, building mass, curb cuts, things like that. Maybe the location based upon safety. And then we get down here and it says, but we cannot regulate landscaping or fencing or aesthetic conditions and things like that. And building inspections. And so it gets very detailed. And for any of you that actually read through it all, thank you very much. But even I was getting, it's a lot of detail. And like I said, I'll usually just, if we don't use it that often, I'm just going to pull this out when we're dealing with a school district issue or a charter school, which we've dealt with the school district one before, especially on impact fees. So,
Corey, who does the building inspections when the building permit's pulled on a school remodel project or otherwise?
The state will hire their own inspectors and then send a report into the city.
Okay.
So like,
and that process is in here that allows them to do that, which I think, as I was rereading that today, we've got some of that legislation now that I think we're going to have to, if we don't respond in a timely manner, developers can hire their own DOPL licensed inspectors. And it kind of looks like they took a sample from this school district building inspection language.
Yeah, the governor vetoed that bill today.
Oh, good. The whole thing, or?
The whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Man, nerd. Oh, wow. Okay.
Just for interesting sake, I assume it's still in here, Lisa. So if we take an example, as Reading Elementary wanted to put in a cell tower, and we did regulate the cell tower under the CUP because of its height, because it's an unrelated school use. I assume that's still the case. If the school chooses to operate outside of school use, our zoning then kicks in. Is that correct?
That's interesting. I'd still try and make that argument. But yeah, let's see it, because it does say, well, I guess you could argue, yeah, this is regulating, is it regulating the use or the user? But I think they've been reasonable to work with us. I would still try to make that regulation, impose that. Okay, this is the blue-footed bird. You can look it up. I'm not going to say it, but it's amazing. They have red-footed ones and blue-footed ones, and they're just really comical. So anyway, those are fun. Does anybody know what bird this is? Okay.
Is it the blue-footed bobby?
Close, but that's not it.
Close, Becky. Good try.
Darn.
That's the nice way to say it. Good job. That's close. We're going to give you a point for that. Okay, so we're still going on with school districts, but I did want to say this was good to read, that we do have some input in coordinating the siting of new schools, and that they're supposed to come and coordinate with us and avoid traffic hazards and future highways and things like that, and safety issues. So I think this is interesting because we get a lot of complaints at the city council level about traffic around schools, and whether or not they need to provide better traffic routes and things like that. But I don't know in Centerville if we'll get a new school, but if we do, if Corey and I are around, we're going to have to remember this one and try to have some input. This one also, a charter school shall be a permitted use in all zoning districts. So that's pretty broad. It's allowed everywhere. And we also have to process charter school applications on a priority basis. Okay, this is a beach of marine iguanas, and these guys can swim. It's crazy. It's crazy to watch these little mini dinosaurs, and then they just get into the water and they swim. And so knowing that, I didn't actually go into the water. They had a snorkeling option, but I decided I wasn't going to do that along with the sharks. So anyway, but actually these were probably some of my favorites, these marine iguanas. So okay, more on school districts, but I think we're done with that. But the last section here, this was adopted in 2017. And I do think it's important. And I think sometimes this is what Corey brings up when we're trying to interpret our code. And, it does say here in terms of enforcing that we have to apply the plain language of our code. So basically they're saying, make sure that you're clear with what your code says, and then apply that plain language. Don't try to, interpret it differently than what the language says. And I always say, if you want it to say what it doesn't say, then just amend it. It's easy. It takes a month or two, but we can do it. So I usually, if there's some confusion, we let that person through the gate, but then we amend our code and we fix it to be clear. And then this is the part that's interesting, is that if it doesn't plainly restrict a land use application, then the land use authority must apply the land use regulations in favor of the applicant. Well, it says application, but essentially, if we're not clear in our code, the land use application gets the benefit of the doubt. That's only if we're not clear, but so that's why we let them in. If we haven't done our job correctly and our code is not clear, then they get the benefit of the doubt. So I thought about, I don't know, this part is not in our code. And I was trying to find a couple, there's different sections where we talk about interpreting the code, and we might add that. But I think it is a good reminder that we need to be clear and apply the plain language. And if it's not, we give the applicant the benefit of the doubt. Any comments on that one? That, like I said, that's fairly new. It's new in the statute, not new how we've been interpreting things.
And just so you know, on appeal process for an administrative decision, the Board of Adjustment, and it's listed in our code, if there's ambiguity, they're required to make their finding in favor of the landowner. So,
okay, good. Thanks for that point.
Yeah, just often when I make an interpretation, sometimes I'm also thinking about, if this gets appealed, how would the argument take place? And if there's enough ambiguity into it, then the safe place is to always interpret it in favor of the landowner.
Good. Okay, well, I have 6 seconds left. And anyway, I hope you're still awake, unlike this little guy. Oop, look, that's pretty good timing. So thanks for listening. And yeah, we'll see where we can go next month. Next month is general plan, 7 pages.
Excellent. No, that's very good, Lisa. Thank you for that. The Galapagos is an interesting place. I have actually wanted to go for a while. My brother went on this mission to Ecuador, and the Galapagos was part of his mission. He spent 6 months on the Galapagos.
Oh my gosh.
He lived there for 6 months, and so he's volunteered to be the tour guide back there. So
yeah, well, that's when I went. They actually require all guides to be residents, or so they try to keep the tourism very. You can't have more than 100 or 200 people on your boat, and you have to use all the food there. And so anyway, but that's amazing.
He'd be an unofficial tour guide, of course, right? But yeah. Okay, well, that's good. I look forward to next month, Lisa. Thanks for that. Let's move on now to the Community Development Director's report and City Council report combined, I guess. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I just need to report to you that, whoa, my screen just went funky. Okay, you're back. Am I back?
Yep.
We're good.
Loud and clear.
I put on there a tentative project, but as of today, it looks like the applicant has not completed some of the tasks that they were required to do. So your April 6th meeting does not have any items on it unless McKinsey corrects me.
No corrections besides that it's going to be on the 14th.
Okay.
I had it wrong on the board.
All right, and I did meet with the city council in a budget work session and again reiterated the desire to have a joint meeting on future planning goals. The report is, they agreed to, it would be a good idea. It's still the issue of working out the technology, whether we're staying with Zoom, whether we're going to do a partial meet together. And so I did not get a final commitment at this point. So that's the report.
Well, we can talk about what to do with that first meeting in April. We can talk about that later if we need to. And then I guess, did the drink shop not need a planning commission approval ultimately?
Yeah, they have to meet certain criteria. And if they can meet that criteria of a previous approvals, then they likely can be a permitted use in an administrative staff approval. But I've not received back that information from them yet.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Thanks, Corey. Let's move along then to the last item on our agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from the March 10th meeting. Just a 2-pager, so that's not too bad. Does anybody have any recommended changes or adjustments on either page? We'll just go with that. Becky.
I do, yes.
Okay.
Generally, I really appreciate how succinct these are, but on this specific one, I made a specific comment and it sort of just said, she commented on this, so I'm going to just add a little bit if that's okay.
That's fine.
On page 1, line 37 and 38, it says, Commissioner Wright commented on the relationship between parking requirements and landscape requirements. And instead, if we could change that to say, Commissioner Wright commented that aggressive parking requirements can affect landscape and the overall quality of the project.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else with any changes on either page? All right, then I will entertain a motion.
Heidi, let's hear from you. Just kidding. Just kidding. I move.
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Thanks, Spencer. Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
There you go. Heidi's
I don't
on
know the right words to say. Sorry.
It doesn't need to be fancy, but that's fine. All right.
So I like to hear from you.
That's okay. All right, so we have a motion to approve the amended minutes and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great. Then, wait, did we decide we need a motion to adjourn, or can I just say we're adjourned? Lisa?
Motion.
Okay, yes, that's right.
Second, I think she said.
It's a non-debatable motion. All right, so I make a motion to adjourn.
Great. Aye. What do we do?
Yeah, well,
I
we need a-
second
we still need a
that.
s- yeah, we need a second.
Does it need a second?
Yeah, we just don't discuss the
Oh,
motion.
okay. Sorry.
Okay. Motion to adjourn,
Adios.
Becky.
Second.
Oh, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right, any opposed? No. Great.